By the time Ethan Miller understood he had been invited to the ceremony as a sacrifice, the entire Moonridge pack was already waiting to watch him fall. Snow drifted over the open square in soft white sheets, turning the stone courtyard into something almost beautiful, almost merciful, but nothing about that night felt kind. Ethan stood alone beneath the silver arch of the bonding platform, dressed in a plain white suit that had been altered twice and still hung loosely from his slender frame. Around him, the other Omegas wore silk, pearls, and proud smiles, their families gathered close behind them like shields. Ethan had no shield. He had no parents in the crowd, no friends near the steps, no hand reaching for his when the whispers began to rise. Scentless. Defective. Dead moon child. He had heard those words since he was 10 years old, spoken in hallways, at dinner tables, behind doors that were never closed tightly enough. But tonight they were louder because tonight Ryan Hale, the alpha heir of Moonridge, was supposed to choose his mate, and everyone knew Ethan had once believed Ryan would choose him. Ryan had promised it in secret, years ago, beside the frozen lake 2 miles beyond the pack house, when they were both too young to understand how cruel adults could be and old enough to make promises that felt holy. He had taken Ethan's hand then and said, "When I become alpha, no one will ever make you feel unwanted again." Now Ryan stood at the top of the platform in a black formal coat, his blonde hair brushed back, his blue eyes cold enough to match the snow. The pack leader raised one hand for silence. The square went still. Ethan's heartbeat sounded enormous in his own ears. Ryan did not look at him at first. He looked at the crowd, at the council, at the powerful families who had come to secure alliances, then finally, slowly, he let his gaze fall on Ethan as if he were something left outside too long in the rain. For the future strength of Moonridge, Ryan said, his voice smooth and public and rehearsed, "I reject Ethan Miller." The words landed without sound, yet Ethan felt them everywhere. In his chest. In his knees. In the cold air trapped in his lungs. A few people gasped, but most smiled with relief, as if the pack had finally cleaned a stain from its name. Ryan stepped down from the platform and stopped in front of him. From his pocket, he took the thin silver promise ring Ethan had given him years ago. Ethan had thought Ryan had lost it. Instead, Ryan dropped it at his feet. "No alpha can build a future with a scentless Omega," he said quietly, but not quietly enough. Laughter broke across the square like cracking ice. Ethan bent to pick up the ring, not because he still wanted it, but because he refused to leave even one piece of his heart on the ground for them to step on. His fingers trembled in the snow. Someone behind him muttered that he should be grateful they were letting him walk away. Someone else said Moonridge had been patient with a useless Omega for too long. Ethan rose slowly, cheeks burning, eyes dry. He would not cry for them. He would not give Ryan that final gift. Then the pack leader spoke again, colder than the weather. "By dawn, Ethan Miller will leave Moonridge territory. His name will be removed from the ancestral stone." That was when the first black SUV rolled through the iron gates. Then another. Then a third. The engines were quiet, expensive, almost unreal against the shocked silence of the square. Every alpha in Moonridge straightened at once. The royal crest gleamed on each door, a black wolf beneath a silver crown. Ethan had seen that symbol only in history books and emergency broadcasts. Blackwood. The Alpha King had arrived. The royal SUV stopped in a perfect line just inside the iron gates, their headlights cutting through the snow and turning every face in the square pale and exposed. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. The Moonridge pack, which had laughed at Ethan only seconds earlier, suddenly stood like children caught breaking something priceless. The driver of the center SUV stepped out first, a tall beater in a dark suit, and opened the rear door with both hands. A black leather shoe touched the snow. Then Alpha King Alexander Blackwood emerged into the courtyard, and the world changed shape around him. He was taller than every alpha in the square. Dressed in a long black coat that moved like a shadow behind him. His hair was dark, his face calm, his silver eyes unreadable. He did not need to raise his voice. He did not need guards to announce him. His presence alone pressed the noise out of the air. The pack leader hurried down the steps, his proud posture bending into something close to fear. "Your Majesty," he said, forcing a smile that looked painful. "We were not expecting you until tomorrow morning." Alexander did not answer. His gaze had already passed over the council, over Ryan, over the shining Omegas lined up near the platform, and landed on Ethan. Ethan still stood beside the bonding arch with the broken silver ring clenched in his frozen hand. Mud stained the hem of his white suit. Snow collected in his hair. He knew he should lower his eyes before a king, but something in Alexander's stare held him in place. It was not pity. Ethan knew pity well. It always came soft, sweet, and useless. This was different. This was recognition so sharp it felt almost dangerous. Ryan stepped forward, trying to reclaim the attention of the square. "Your Majesty, forgive the disorder. We were simply concluding an internal matter." Alexander finally looked at him. "Internal," he repeated. The single word made Ryan swallow. The pack leader nodded quickly. "Yes. A disciplinary removal. Ethan Miller has been found unsuitable for Moonridge bonding standards. His scent never developed. His bloodline has no value to our future." Ethan kept his face still, but the words found old bruises in his heart. He had heard them from teachers, council members, even children who had learned cruelty from their parents. Still, hearing them spoken to the Alpha King felt worse, as if his shame had been polished and presented like evidence. Alexander took one slow step forward. Then another. The crowd parted for him without being asked. When he reached Ethan, the snow between them had already covered the ring. Ethan had dropped again without noticing. Alexander looked down at it, then at Ethan's trembling hand. "Did they make you return your own promise?" he asked. Ethan tried to speak, but his throat closed. Ryan answered for him. It was childish sentiment. Nothing binding. Alexander's eyes remained on Ethan. "Was it nothing to you?" Ethan's fingers tightened at his side. The entire pack waited for him to collapse, apologize, disappear. Instead, he lifted his chin. "It was everything," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "That was my mistake." For the first time, something moved across Alexander Blackwood's face. Not a smile. Not anger. Something colder and deeper. He turned toward the ancestral stone at the center of the courtyard, the ancient white slab where every true member of Moonridge had left a mark of scent, bloodline, and belonging. The pack leader rushed to explain. "The removal ritual has not yet been completed. Once his name is erased, the embarrassment will be finished." Alexander looked back at Ethan. "No," he said. "It has just begun." The pack leader went so still that even the snow seemed louder than his breathing. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "I am sure there has been a misunderstanding." Alexander Blackwood did not look at him. He looked at the ancestral stone, that huge white slab rising from the center of the courtyard like a frozen altar. Names shimmered across its surface in pale silver lines, generations of Moonridge bloodlines carved into magic, lore, and memory. Ethan had stood before that stone every year since childhood, watching other children press their palms to it and laugh when it glowed for them. It had never glowed for him. Not once. The council had called it proof. The teachers had called it a defect. Ryan had once whispered that it did not matter, that a stone could not decide whether Ethan deserved to be loved. Tonight, Ryan had used that same silence to throw him away. "Bring him to the stone," Alexander said. The order was quiet, but every guard in the square straightened. Ethan's stomach tightened. The pack leader smiled too quickly, relieved to return to a ritual he thought he could control. "Of course. Once the stone rejects him in your presence, the matter will be clear." Ethan felt every eye drag over him as he walked forward. His shoes slipped slightly on the snowy stone, but he did not fall. He would not fall again. Not in front of Ryan. Not in front of the people who had spent years teaching him to shrink. When he reached the ancestral stone, the old councilwoman took his wrist with cold fingers and guided his hand toward the surface. Her voice carried through the courtyard. Ethan Miller, born under the winter moon, presented for final removal from Moonridge Pack records. The stone remained dull and silent. A murmur of satisfaction moved through the crowd. Ryan exhaled like a man being forgiven. "You see," he said, turning toward Alexander. "There is nothing there. Alexander stepped closer. "No," he said. "There is too much there." Before anyone could respond, he removed his black glove and placed his bare hand lightly over Ethan's, pressing Ethan's palm fully against the stone. The change was immediate. A sound like distant thunder rolled beneath the courtyard. The white slab flashed once, then again, brighter each time, until the entire square was flooded with silver light. People cried out and covered their eyes. Ethan tried to pull away, frightened by the heat blooming under his palm, but Alexander's hand stayed steady above his. Not trapping him. Anchoring him. Lines appeared across the stone, not the thin marks of ordinary pack blood, but deep lunar symbols spreading outward in rings, erasing nothing, revealing everything. The councilwoman stumbled back. The pack leader's face lost all color. Ryan stared at Ethan as if he had never seen him before. Then Ethan smelled it. For the first time in his life, something rose from his own skin, soft and impossible, like snow melting under morning sun, like white flowers opening in a silent forest. The courtyard went silent. Every Alpha felt it. Every Omega understood it. Alexander lowered his voice so only Ethan could hear. They did not raise a scentless Omega. They buried a royal one. Ethan turned toward the pack leader, and for one perfect second, the man who had erased him looked terrified of what he had failed to destroy. For several seconds, no one in Moonridge Square dared to speak. The ancestral stone still glowed beneath Ethan's palm, its silver light spilling over his face, his ruined white suit, and the broken ring half buried in the snow behind him. Ethan could feel the warmth moving through his hand and up his arm, not painful, not frightening now, but familiar in a way that made his chest ache. It felt like something inside him had been calling for years and had finally heard an answer. The pack leader recovered first, because men like him always reached for control before truth could settle. "This is impossible," he said, his voice thin. "The stone must be reacting to your majesty. It cannot be him." Alexander Blackwood lifted his hand away. The light did not fade. It grew brighter. A quiet sound passed through the crowd, not laughter this time, but fear wearing the shape of disbelief. Ryan took one step forward, his polished shoes sinking into the snow. "Ethan," he said, and the way he spoke his name was different now, softer, hungry with regret. Ethan turned his head just enough to look at him. Hours ago, that voice would have broken him. Now it felt far away, like a song from a house that had burned down long ago. Ryan swallowed. "There has been a mistake. I did not know." Ethan looked at the silver symbols blooming under his hand. "You knew I was alone," he said. That was enough. Ryan flinched as if the words had crossed the square and found the exact place he had hidden his shame. The pack leader stepped between them, smiling again, but the smile shook at the edges. "Your Majesty, Moonridge is grateful that this rare situation has been discovered. Naturally, Ethan remains under our protection until the council can determine the proper use of his bloodline." The temperature seemed to drop. Alexander turned slowly. "Use," he repeated. One word. Quiet. Devastating. The pack leader realized his mistake too late. "I only mean his future must be managed responsibly." Alexander removed his long black coat and placed it over Ethan's shoulders. The fabric was heavy, warm, and faintly scented with cedar, winter air, and something ancient that made every Alpha in the square lower their eyes. Ethan froze, not from fear, but from the impossible gentleness of the gesture. No one had covered him when he was cold. No one had stood close enough to block the wind. Alexander fastened the coat at Ethan's throat himself, then faced the pack. "You had 17 years to protect him," he said. "You chose to shame him. You had tonight to release him with dignity. You chose spectacle. So hear me clearly. Ethan Miller is no longer subject to Moonridge authority." A council member gasped. "But our laws," Alexander's silver eyes cut toward him, "end at my border." The royal guards moved to either side of Ethan, not touching him, simply forming a wall between him and the people who had called him worthless. Ryan's face twisted with panic. "Ethan, wait. We can talk. I can fix this." Ethan looked at the broken ring in the snow. Then he looked at Ryan. You already taught me what your promises are worth. Alexander offered Ethan his gloved hand, patient, steady, asking without forcing. Ethan stared at it, then placed his fingers in the Alpha King's palm. The ancestral stone flashed one final time behind them, and across its glowing surface, a new mark appeared, not Moonridge silver, but royal black edged in moonlight. Alexander saw it. So did the pack leader. His face turned ashen. Ethan whispered, "What does that mean?" Alexander's hand closed gently around his. "It means they were not hiding you from a pack," he said. "They were hiding you from a throne." Ethan did not realize he was shaking until Alexander Blackwood guided him away from the ancestral stone and the royal coat trembled around his shoulders. The courtyard that had felt endless a few minutes earlier suddenly seemed small, too small for the truth that had just awakened inside it. Every face Ethan passed carried a different kind of fear. The Omegas who had mocked his plain clothes now lowered their eyes. The council members who had called him defective stood frozen beside the glowing stone. Even the pack leader, who had spent years speaking about Ethan as if he were a burden to be managed, looked at him as if he had become a storm he could not command. Ryan followed them with desperate steps. "Ethan, please," he said. "You have to understand. I was under pressure. My father, the council, the alliance families. They all told me you would weaken the pack." Ethan stopped. Alexander stopped with him. Silent and watchful. The snow kept falling between them, soft as ash. Ethan looked at Ryan and searched for the boy from the frozen lake, the one who had once promised him a future. For years, Ethan had kept that memory alive like a candle in a dark room. Tonight, Ryan had blown it out in front of everyone. "They told you I was worthless," Ethan said. "But you chose to believe them because it made your life easier." Ryan's mouth opened, then closed. Behind him, the pack leader stepped forward, his voice suddenly smooth with calculation. "Your Majesty, an emotional decision in a public square could create political confusion. Ethan was born on Moonridge land. His records, his guardianship, his blood status, all of it belongs here. Surely the royal court will require formal transfer documents." Alexander turned his head slightly. "You erased his name from your protection before witnesses." The pack leader paled. Alexander continued, each word calm enough to be terrifying. "You declared him unwanted. You ordered him removed by dawn. You cannot throw a person away and then claim ownership because you discover value in what you discarded." A ripple moved through the crowd. Ethan felt something inside him loosen, not happiness, not yet, but the first fragile breath of justice. The royal beater opened the door of the center SUV. Warm golden light spilled across the snow. Alexander looked at Ethan, not commanding now. Offering. "You do not have to step into that car because I am king," he said quietly. "You step in only if you want to leave." The choice stunned Ethan more than the crown, more than the glowing stone, more than Ryan falling silent behind him. No one in Moonridge had ever given him a choice without hiding a chain inside it. Ethan looked back once at the square, at the silver arch, at the broken ring disappearing beneath fresh snow. Then he stepped into the royal SUV. Alexander entered after him, leaving careful space between them. The door closed, shutting out the cold, the stares, and Ryan's last broken whisper of his name. Inside, the leather seat was warm. Ethan stared down at his hands, still expecting someone to tell him he had misunderstood, that the miracle was temporary, that he would be returned before sunrise. Instead, Alexander reached to the console and picked up a sealed bottle of water. He opened it, then placed it in Ethan's hands. "Drink slowly," he said. "You have been standing in 20-degree weather without a coat." Ethan blinked hard, embarrassed by how close he came to crying over something as ordinary as water. The convoy began moving. Moonridge Square slid past the tinted windows, smaller with every second. Then a soft silver glow reflected in the glass. Ethan touched the back of his neck. Alexander saw it too, and for the first time, the Alpha King's perfect calm cracked. Beneath Ethan's collar, hidden for 17 years, a crescent moon mark was waking. Ethan felt the crescent mark warm beneath his fingertips, and every breath in the SUV seemed to disappear at once. Alexander Blackwood was still beside him, still controlled, still perfectly dressed in black, but something in his silver eyes had changed. For the first time since the royal convoy entered Moonridge, the Alpha King looked not powerful, but shaken. Ethan pulled his hand away from his neck as if the glow belonged to someone else. "What is it?" he asked. His voice sounded smaller than he wanted it to. Alexander did not answer immediately. He reached toward the front seat without looking away from Ethan. "Marcus, privacy screen." The royal beater driving the SUV lifted his hand, and a dark glass panel rose between the front and back seats. The city road ahead vanished, leaving Ethan alone with the king, the hum of the engine, and the silver light pulsing under his collar. Ethan pressed himself closer to the door, not because Alexander had threatened him, but because 17 years in Moonridge had taught him that secrets always became punishments. Alexander noticed. His expression softened by a fraction. "I am not angry with you," he said. "I am angry at what was done to you." Ethan swallowed. "You know what this mark means." It was not a question. Alexander looked out the window, where pine trees blurred past in the snow. "When I was a child, royal tutors told me the Blackwood throne was not meant to stand alone. Every few generations, a lunar omega would be born with a crescent mark at the back of the neck. They were not property. They were not weapons. They were partners to the crown, born with the rare ability to calm the old Alpha bloodline when power became too heavy to carry." Ethan stared at him. The word sounded impossible, like a fairy tale told to lonely children so they would sleep through the winter. "Then why would Moonridge hide me?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Because whoever controls a lunar omega controls the future of the throne. If they could not use you openly, they could erase you quietly until the right moment." The water bottle in Ethan's hands crinkled under his grip. He thought of every doctor who had said his scent was delayed, every council meeting where he had been told to wait, every strange medicine given to him as a child to help his body settle. He thought of the ancestral stone staying silent year after year, not because he was empty, but because someone had taught it to hold its breath. "Ryan knew nothing," Ethan whispered, more to himself than to Alexander. "Maybe not the truth," Alexander said. "But he knew you were being hurt, and he chose the comfort of the crowd." That sentence settled over Ethan more heavily than the royal coat. Outside, the convoy left the forest road and turned onto a private highway. In the distance, beyond the snowfall, black towers rose against the night, lit with silver along their edges. Blackwood Palace did not look like the castles from Ethan's schoolbooks. It looked modern, fortified, and alive, a royal estate built into the side of a mountain 20 miles from the nearest town. Ethan should have felt afraid. Instead, for the first time all night, the warmth in his chest did not feel like panic. The crescent mark brightened again, and the SUV dashboard flickered. Marcus called from the front, his voice tense but professional. "Your Majesty, the palace sensors just identified a royal bond signature." Ethan froze. Alexander closed his eyes for 1 second, as if the words had confirmed the one truth he had feared most. Then his phone rang. He answered on speaker. An older woman's voice filled the car, breathless and alarmed. "Alexander, the throne room seal just opened by itself." Ethan looked at him. Alexander looked back at Ethan, and in the silver reflection of the window, the crescent on Ethan's neck burned like a moon that had finally risen. The phone call ended, but the silence it left behind felt louder than the engine. Ethan sat motionless beneath Alexander Blackwood's coat, one hand hovering near the glowing crescent on his neck, afraid that touching it again might open something else he did not understand. Outside the window, Blackwood Palace grew larger with every mile, its black towers cut into the mountain like they had been carved from night itself. Silver lights burned along the balconies and high glass walls, not decorative, but watchful, like stars arranged by someone who expected enemies to come from the dark. The royal convoy passed through the first security gate, then the second, then a third guarded by stone walls taller than pickup trucks. No one laughed here. No one whispered cruel names. Every guard lowered his head as the center SUV rolled beneath the covered entrance, but Ethan could feel their attention shift toward him the moment the door opened. The air outside was freezing, close to 15 degrees, yet the mark at his neck burned warm enough to chase away the cold. Alexander stepped out first, then turned and offered his hand again. Ethan stared at it for a second longer than necessary. He was still waiting for the command hidden beneath the kindness. It never came. "There will be people inside who want answers," Alexander said quietly. "You do not owe them your fear." Ethan placed his hand in his, and together they entered the palace. The main hall was enormous, with polished black floors, white marble pillars, and a ceiling so high the chandeliers looked like captured moons. At the far end stood an older woman in a silver-grey suit, her white hair pinned neatly at the back of her head. She carried herself like someone who had survived every secret the palace had ever tried to keep. "Your Majesty," she said, then her eyes moved to Ethan, and her composure cracked. "Oh, my God." Alexander's voice softened with respect. "Marion." The woman took one careful step closer. The seal opened when he crossed the outer gate. The old throne recognized him before the palace systems did. Ethan tightened his fingers around Alexander's hand without meaning to. "Please stop talking like I am a key," he said. The hall went still. For one terrible second, Ethan thought he had insulted the entire royal court. Then Alexander turned toward everyone gathered there, guards, advisors, household staff, and royal doctors waiting with tablets in hand. "You heard him," he said. "No one speaks of him as an object again." Marion nodded immediately, and something like approval flickered in her eyes. "Of course." She faced Ethan, gentler now. "Forgive me. My name is Marion Cole. I served Alexander's mother. I also searched for you for many years." Ethan's breath caught. "Search for me?" Marion looked toward the sealed double doors at the end of the hall. They were no longer sealed. A thin silver line glowed between them. 17 years ago, the last recorded lunar Omega child vanished from royal protection during a winter transfer. The official report said the baby did not survive the storm. Ethan felt the world tilt under his feet. Alexander moved closer, steady but not crowding him. "That report was a lie," Marion said, her voice breaking around the truth. "And I think Moonridge has known it all along." The crescent on Ethan's neck flashed so brightly that every light in the hall dimmed. The throne room doors opened by themselves, slow and silent, revealing a black throne beneath a circle of moonlight. On its silver armrest, a name appeared in glowing script. Not Alexander's. Ethan's. Ethan stared at the glowing letters on the throne until his own name stopped feeling like something that belonged to him. Ethan Miller shone across the silver armrest in clean lunar script, brighter than every chandelier in the hall, brighter than the snowlight spilling through the palace windows. Behind him, no one spoke. Not Marion, not the advisors, not the royal guards who had gone perfectly still along the marble walls. Even Alexander Blackwood seemed carved from silence, his gaze fixed on the throne as if history had just stepped out of a locked room and called his name. Ethan pulled his hand from Alexander's, not because he wanted distance, but because he needed to know he could stand by himself when the world changed again. "That is not possible," he whispered. Marion's eyes glistened, but her voice remained steady. "The throne does not respond to possibility. It responds to blood, bond, and royal lunar inheritance." Ethan almost laughed, but the sound never made it past his throat. All his life, Moonridge had told him he was empty. Now a palace he had never seen was saying he belonged to something ancient enough to frighten kings. He took one step into the throne room. The black floor reflected him like dark water. With every step, the crescent mark at his neck warmed, and the silver circle of moonlight above the throne widened. Alexander followed several feet behind, close enough to protect, far enough not to claim the moment from him. That careful distance made Ethan's chest ache more than any dramatic vow could have. At the base of the throne, a hidden panel opened with a soft click. Inside lay a small silver bracelet, sized for a child, wrapped in faded white cloth. Marion covered her mouth. Alexander bent and lifted it with reverent care. The cloth unfolded, revealing 3 embroidered words. Prince Ethan Blackwood. The room blurred. Ethan shook his head slowly. "No. My parents were ordinary pack members. Moonridge told me they died before I could remember them." Marion's face turned pale with grief. "Your mother was Queen Helena's younger cousin. Your father was her sworn guardian. They were taking you to a safe house during a succession crisis. The convoy disappeared in a storm 20 miles from Moonridge territory. Ethan looked at Alexander. You knew there was a missing child. I knew there was a grave without a body, Alexander said. I did not know that child was standing in the snow tonight, being erased by people who should have protected him. Before Ethan could answer, Marcus entered the throne room with a tablet in his hand and urgency in his eyes. Your Majesty, Moonridge just sent an emergency petition to the High Council. They are claiming Ethan Miller was taken from their custody unlawfully. The old fear returned so quickly Ethan hated himself for it. Alexander saw it and stepped between Ethan and the open doors, his voice low and unshakable. They rejected Ethan Miller in public. But they have just challenged Prince Ethan Blackwood in writing. Marion straightened, all softness leaving her face. Then we answer before dawn. The throne pulsed once, and the bracelet in Alexander's hand unlocked by itself. It rose into the air and fastened gently around Ethan's wrist. Across the silver band, a second message appeared, older and colder than the first. The lost moon has returned. Crown him before they come. The words on the silver bracelet faded, but the warning stayed in the room like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Crown him before they come. Ethan looked at Alexander Blackwood, then at Marion, then at the throne that had somehow known his name before he had known himself. I cannot be crowned, he said, his voice unsteady but clear. An hour ago, I was being removed from a pack record. I do not know court law. I do not know royal history. I do not even know who I am supposed to be. Alexander did not step closer until Ethan looked at him. A crown does not make you worthy, he said. It only forces the world to admit what was already true. The words should have sounded impossible, maybe even cruel in their weight, but Alexander spoke them like a promise placed carefully into Ethan's hands. Marion moved to a cabinet hidden behind one of the white marble pillars and removed a narrow black box. Inside rested a circlet of silver, simple and old, shaped like two crescent moons meeting at the center. This is not a coronation of rule, she explained gently. It is a recognition of survival. It places you under royal protection in a way no council petition can challenge before sunrise. Ethan stared at the circlet. He thought of Moonridge Square, of laughter, of Ryan's ring in the snow, of the ancestral stone glowing only after someone finally stood beside him. He thought of every year he had apologized for taking up space. Then he lowered his head. Marion set the circlet in his pale hair, and the throne room filled with silver light. No music played. No crowd cheered. But every guard in the room dropped to one knee, not out of fear, but recognition. Alexander was the last to kneel. That was what nearly broke Ethan. The Alpha King, the man every pack feared, lowered himself before the Omega Moonridge had called worthless. Ethan reached for him without thinking. Please do not. Alexander looked up. I kneel to the truth, Ethan. Not to the wound they gave you. Before Ethan could answer, the palace alarm sounded once, low and controlled. Marcus entered again, his face tense. A Moonridge delegation has reached the outer gate. Ryan Hale is with them. The pack leader is demanding Ethan be returned for protective custody. The old fear rose, but it did not swallow him this time. Ethan touched the circlet on his head, then the bracelet on his wrist. He was still afraid. He was still confused. But he was no longer standing alone in a snowy square while others decided what his life was worth. Alexander stood and offered his hand. You do not have to see them. Ethan looked toward the open doors, where dawn was beginning to turn the palace windows grey. Yes, he said softly. I do. Minutes later, Ethan stepped onto the balcony above the front courtyard, Alexander at his right, Marion at his left, royal guards lined behind them. Below, Ryan looked up and went completely still. He saw the circlet first. Then the bracelet. Then Ethan's eyes, no longer lowered. The pack leader began to speak, but Ethan's crescent mark flared, and every microphone across the courtyard sparked to life. From somewhere deep beneath the palace, the throne answered in a voice older than any living king. The lost moon stands recognized. Ryan whispered Ethan's name like a prayer arriving too late. Then the outer gate cameras caught movement beyond the tree line, dozens of headlights climbing the mountain road, not Moonridge, not Blackwood, but unknown royal crests from packs that should have been extinct. Alexander's expression darkened. Marion whispered, "They heard the throne." Ethan looked at the rising lights and understood with a chill that his return had not ended the story. It had awakened everyone who had been waiting for him.